Hi everyone, I'm Commissioner Rachel Iver, and I'm the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Welcome to the Southwest Community Center. You could have that inside. Today we have our very first ever live recording of our All Access podcast, and it's going to be a phenomenal program. Just like we always do in MOPD, we have access provider today as well. We have American Sign Language interpretation that is being provided by Hester Bademar in Jen McElroy. And then we also have real-time captioning being provided by Kathy Reagan as well. So thank you so much for helping to make sure everything that we do is accessible. This is going to be a music program, and I'm going to turn it over to our incredible hosts who have been doing this podcast since it started. Our Deputy Commissioner Christina McLean, Lauren Huberman, our Career Center Program Director. Let's give them a big round of applause, either by waving hands, clapping, whatever. And I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, I'm Lauren Huberman.
And I'm Christina McLean. Welcome to All Access.
Thank you all for being here today.
All right, in case this is your first time tuning in, the mission of All Access is to share stories, build community around people with disabilities and employment. And Lauren, look at the community we have built.
Yes. Thank you all for coming. We are very excited by this, and we appreciate each and every one of you attending. So, excellent. So, speaking of community, we also wanted to talk about two events that we have coming up. Both are to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have an event at Malcolm X College on July 22nd. Watch our social media for that. It's going to be a celebration. It's going to be very cool and interesting. And then we will also be at the Disability Pride Parade on Saturday, July 26th. And the Grand Marshal this year will be our very own Commissioner Arfa. So we hope to see you at both events. We are very excited about both of those.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy summer.
It is.
All right, let's get down to it.
Let's
Why
get down
are we
to
here
business.
Today, Lauren?
Okay, well, today we have a wonderful special guest with us. She has been the CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, also known as NAMI Chicago, since 2014. She has worked with the city on a variety of projects, including the Police Accountability Task Force, the COVID-19 Recovery Task Force, and the Health and Human Services Transition Committee. At the heart of her leadership is the belief that with courage and hope, we can bring healing to those who are overlooked in our mental health system and in our community. Now, please give a very warm welcome to the CEO of NAMI Chicago, Alexa James.
Welcome. So happy. You guys have a walk-up song.
Yeah.
You're fancy.
We're big time.
You are big time.
Yeah, we made it.
And like you've really grown your podcast experience.
Wow. I mean, it takes a village.
It really does. We had a lot of support to get where we are today.
Look at all.
Seriously.
No.
This is really fun and cool, and definitely the first time we've done this. And it's a different experience, and of course we're thrilled to have you.
So happy to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. And we know that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We want to kick us off by just learning a little bit about how NAMI is celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month.
Well, you do know that every month at NAMI is Mental Health Awareness Month, although we are happy that we get May, which is not the shortest month of the year, certainly. Mm-hmm. And it's fun because what we've also noticed is that there are so many like weeks and days now associated with mental health, and so it's really woven through the year. But some of the ways that we celebrate is to just like really dig deep and activate in a bigger way our outreach experience. Actually, this week, BMO hosted like a walk for all of their employees, and about 700 people came together in the effort to talk about mental health and celebrate mental wellness, et cetera. We've been doing a ton of trainings, and then we have our big fundraiser, our gala at the end of the month that really is about honoring people who've been healers in Chicago. And so we're excited to kind of end the month that way.
Yeah, that's a great way of celebrating.
Yeah, well, excellent. We also wanted to let folks know that we're going to talk a little bit up here. Christina and I have some questions prepared, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience, and they're going to have some questions for you as well. So, yeah, just wanted to put that out there in terms of format. So, this is a very heavy question
we're kinda
to
turning.
start with. Now we're going to talk
Okay.
about very heavy things.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we ready? Buckle up.
Yes, let's turn out the
turned
lights
quickly.
and
Pray.
get really
Centered.
serious. Okay, we just saw the series that the Sun-Times published about those with serious mental illness and not getting proper care, and as a result ending up committing violent crimes, cycling through the carceral system, and it's really heartbreaking. And so, of course, we wanted to know, what you thought about those kinds of cases.
Yeah, it really is the center of so much that NAMI does, is identifying and naming the fact that our system of mental health care, either publicly or privately funded, is not adequate to support all people with mental illnesses. It does not even have programs necessarily for some people who otherwise fall through the cracks. And it doesn't necessarily create space for those who don't necessarily want to engage in treatment, right? Now, there's, of course, programs that assist with that, usually through the court system. But wouldn't it be better if we had a community-based approach to supporting people? While the series is important, it certainly highlights like the significant gaps in our system and horrific outcomes that happen when people don't receive treatment. It also, what scares me is it kind of amplifies this drumbeat that people with mental illness are violent, and it's not the truth. In fact, it's the opposite of the truth, that people living with mental illness are more likely to be victims of crime. And so we are talking about a really specific group of situations that are traumatizing for the individual, for their family, and for folks who are obviously directly impacted. So yeah, we pay attention to this, and we've always named that there is not a space for folks who have the characteristics of some serious mental illness.
Yeah, and something that the article, of course, highlighted that the authors pointed out is that really there's not a coordinated system of care, and that these people are really on the fringes, and because there's not this coordinated care, they're shuffled from one place to the next. Maybe there's a plan, maybe there's not. So, I mean, do you imagine that there is going to ever be some type of wraparound care, whether it's in the city or, at some level that we're able to provide?
Sure, some providers are doing wraparound care, so we definitely want to give them kudos. But I think this is what I hear. What I hear is we're passing people along as though they don't matter. Until we really identify that people living with mental illness, serious mental illness matter, no, this system will never change. It's like a pass the buck kind of thing. And nobody seems to have the resources or the interest or motivation to really sit with somebody and hold them through their journey the whole way through.
Yeah, it was interesting too, because one of the other things that the authors of the article pointed out is that it's actually less expensive to provide that care, to provide that wraparound support versus having someone go to Cook County Jail or prison. Sometimes it's the argument that it's a numbers thing, but ultimately I feel like what you're saying too is that people need to say that these individuals matter.
They totally matter, and housing matters, and hospitalization is expensive. It's expensive on the system when people are experiencing, houselessness, when they don't feel like they have a place to call their home. There's no way you can get treatment in that position, and it's expensive for the families that end up like kind of living their days trying to keep their loved ones alive. So absolutely, there's definitely like a cost benefit. I think what's complicated and a little bit weedy is the cost benefit reflects like 3 different government, right? So you have the county, the city, and the state. And it's, I think, hard to articulate because we don't pool our dollars to resource for mental health where the cost savings actually hits. Yeah.
So you mentioned housing. What other types of resources would, allow someone to have wraparound services?
Certainly. So it kind of starts with like figuring out what systems those people are already connected to, because often things get really clunky because we overconnect people or we underconnect people. And then who is partnering with that person in their journey. Often that can be a care coordinator or even maybe somebody in their insurance with their insurance system or a case manager in a program. So we would want housing. We need to make sure that they have access to financial stability, either through disability or employment, which I know we'll talk about later, access to healthy and sustainable food source, and community. Community is really important. I mean, a lot of folks actually move into independent housing and become incredibly lonely and isolated after being in more of a group setting. And so we need to also manage how to balance that. And there are solutions. It's not rocket science. And we've seen other places do that really well.
Now we know a lot of, the cases covered in those articles were extreme cases, like you mentioned. And everyone in their day-to-day life deals with some level of stress or anxiety. When is it that that stress and anxiety becomes more of a mental health condition?
Yeah, there's a few different ways to answer that. And so let me take a step back for a second. We talk about different health and wellness issues all the time, and we usually name things to pay attention to by looking at the symptoms, right? So if you have these many symptoms, you should see a doctor. And it's a little bit different with mental health, I think, because we often are the experts of our own mental health in a way that is very different from maybe like heart disease. I would definitely need an intervention from a doctor to see what was going on inside of me. And so often folks aren't believed, or they don't have the language to articulate, the mental health literacy, to articulate what they're feeling and how it's becoming dysfunctional or not in their lives. So some of the ways that we identify this is, has stress become less manageable? Now, who doesn't have any stress in their lives, particularly now, but even not now, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, right? So part of mental health is being able to just manage that stress in a way that doesn't interfere in relationships, your job, and your general feeling of baseline. And so if you're spending more time feeling sad and lonely and hopeless than you are feeling kind of above the line and hopeful and even finding joy, it's super important to notice. But we don't have to make that a fault. We don't have to make that like there's something wrong with you. There's probably something right with you, actually, that you're able to have that like dynamic engagement with your emotions. It's about identifying who is in the room that can hear you and see you and maybe support you in reaching out should you need something more intensive than yoga or a walk or a good meal or time with family.
Yeah, okay. And you just mentioned a few, but what are some general ways that people can reduce their stress or anxiety?
It's so different for everybody, right? Some people really do need to isolate a bit and reduce stimuli and reduce interaction with people to try to re-energize. And some other people really need to re-engage with community. But there's like kind of some staple categories that are important. So stable and safe housing. Now we can have a roof over our head, but do we feel safe at night in our neighborhood, in our home, with other people around us? Do we have quality relationships that make us actually feel good about ourselves and not bad about ourselves? Do we have a sense of purpose? Do we work? Do we volunteer? Do we give back? Are we advocates? Are we compassionate like listeners? That's purpose. And access to healthcare, of course, is critically important, and quality access. And then, of course, like, do we feel seen in our community, right? So these are kind of the foundational pieces that are the ingredients for mental health.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you talk about community and feeling connected. And there's, of course, been a lot in the news, particularly with like Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, who talked a lot about the loneliness epidemic. And so, you know, how do you think people can build stronger connections and a sense of community? If someone's feeling very lonely and isolated, how can they learn how to connect more and build those connections? You know, especially now when people are plugged into phones, they're maybe going to coffee shops to work alone, and you know, there's a lot of activities I think now that happen in isolation.
Yeah, no, that's totally right, Lauren. So there's like the part that's like we have socialized ourselves to not be social beings. It's so interesting. We do need coaching of how to talk to each other, which is like so feels strange to us, I'm sure, that didn't grow up in that generation. And then how do people find connection? It can be really intimidating. It can be intimidating too if you don't have a partner in that. And so how can you find a community that sees you? Sometimes it's trial and error. And sometimes, honestly, it is using technology to be like that first step into finding groups of people. But being with people in person is so important because, you know, humans regulate each other. And it doesn't really happen over Zoom or over the phone as much or as powerfully. So for some folks, it's their faith-based community. For some folks, it's just walking around the grocery store and practicing smiling. For other people, it's your work. For other people, it's not your work. They're like, I don't want relationships with people at work. My colleague and I were just talking about a coffee shop near our office who's doing like social runs, you know. So the internet does allow us to provide kind of a template or a calendar of ways in which to connect. And then also making boundaries. So this may feel like disconnecting, but it's actually thinking about where do I want to say yes? And sometimes we're saying yes in places, in relationships that don't feel good for us. And so how can we say no more so we have more space to engage with new and maybe a little bit more, we need more confidence in some newer relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's true. Yeah, sometimes it does feel nice just to go to the store and smile at someone and say hello.
Right.
You know, so that's a very easy way that we can all connect with somebody. Yeah, it's a good
and sometimes
assignment.
you go to the grocery store or Target or something and you smile at someone and they're not friendly back.
Yeah,
but
no.
just remember that's not about you.
Yeah, it makes
They
me
need-
angry when
yeah.
people do that.
Yeah,
you know,
but
when
I
you
do
try
feel
and say
like
hi.
the stress of our community is like tangible.
That's true.
In those spaces too. So it's just making that one connection. And there's some psychologists who actually talk about that one connection being more meaningful than even like a therapy session that week. And that keeping that gratitude journal actually, that's listing the ways in which you were able to connect with people during the day can be really enhancing.
Huh, that's interesting. I also, as a side note, I wanted to ask you about, you know, I was looking at Fresh Air, hosted by Terry Gross, and she talks about
I mean, you're
how,
basically Terry Gross.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hopefully a little funnier.
Oh,
than-
definitely funnier.
She's not very funny.
She's
She's
not. You're
very
very
serious.
funny. Right,
Thank you.
right.
Thank you so much.
Does she have a co-host?
She does not have a
She
co-host.
doesn't. But she has another host, Tanya Mosley, who's wonderful.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
could be
you're-
Tanya
I'm her.
Mosley.
Yeah, you're her.
Okay.
But no, on Fresh Air, she had somebody on who has been writing about an epidemic of wellness, that people on the other end, like there's also this obsession about wellness. And, you know, I'm going to drink my bone broth. I'm going to do this thing that makes me feel amazing. I mean, it's very like, maybe we can all conjure up who that person might be. And you kind of know who that stereotype is. Like, what do you feel about that on the other end, where there's all these like practices that are going to heal you and make you great, and you're spiritual, and your chakras, and all these, your juice and your cleanse.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know that you're trying to tempt me to judge that stereotype,
okay,
but I
am
am going to. No, totally. I think that it's so interesting that no, this is totally right. So there's folks who've like really become enthusiastic by the purpose of wellness. And that may alienate some people in your community, right? Everything's a balance. The truth of it is, the concern that I have for somebody who is so focused on wellness that it feels like they're chasing the next best thing, just it doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for flexibility there. You know, we can take good care of our bodies and still have fun and still have that cookie and still skip an exercise and all of those things. But for some folks, that level of intensity is super important for their maintenance.
That's fair. You're a very open person.
Thank you
Alexa.
so much. Said no one.
Yeah, no. Okay, well, one other question, then I'm going to turn it back over to Tanya Mosley over here.
She's hogging all
I'm sorry. I just really wanted to ask you about the wellness epidemic. But, you know, we know that employment, like you said, is a way to connect with people. It's an important place where you spend a lot of your time and your energy. And at the same time, we also have seen, even from like a survey that NAMI was part of, a NAMI Ipsos survey in 2014, that a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about mental health at their place of employment. And so, one, you know, why is it important that we talk about mental health at our place of employment? And two, what can employers do to make people feel more comfortable?
Yes, so let's start with what can employers do to make people feel more comfortable. There has to be a sense of safety, emotional safety, because in order to work well together with other humans, we have to have a sense of what they need out of their work experience, and vice versa. Their managers also have to be able to articulate what they need, right? It's not transactional, these relationships. And so, but creating that safety starts like at day one. I actually even think it starts at the interview. So how are you asking questions about what the wellness opportunities are within an organization, and how are you as the hiring manager able to articulate that with confidence? And sometimes that doesn't happen. There aren't wellness programs. I'll tell you, as a hiring manager myself, I hear it more than I've ever heard people asking me, you know, what are the wellness programs at NAMI? How do you take care of your employees? And to me, it's like a really important question, and it makes me think that they are much more aligned with our culture, actually. And then actually have those resources. So if you're touting that you are an organization that supports wellness, make sure that you stand by that. And what that means is there's going to be more work for you as the organizational leadership, because it's going to require flexibility and flexible accommodations, maybe even outside of like the reasonable accommodations asked. And when all of that stuff is true and felt, then I think that some of the initial conversations and onboarding are like, what do you need? How do you manage stress? What is an example of a way that you can thrive in the workplace or not thrive in the workplace? We obviously can't ask people directly if they have a stress management challenge or if they have a mental illness, but often if you can lay the groundwork, people will feel more comfortable opening up. I also think it has to be very, very clear and transparent around the rules of human resources, that you cannot change the course of a hire due to somebody's past diagnosis or current diagnosis.
Yeah, and what are some examples of that flexibility?
So,
I know that you guys at NAMI you
yes.
have a lot of
Flexibility.
Yes.
Well, my assistant would say that my hair appointments and other things are on the calendar often during the workday. But you know, sometimes you got to fit it in.
Yeah.
You got to fit it in. No one's judging
it.
me.
Yeah.
I carry shame and guilt about it. But you know, your doctor appointment, if you're a healthy person, you have like once, maybe twice a year. If you're in therapy, it's typically weekly. And we don't want anyone to lose their good therapist because of a work schedule. And so accommodating that time, we see all the time at my office, where people are either doing Zooms or running out to see their clinician. And it's really less about like, okay, make up that hour. It's just like, this is part of your day and part of what feels good for you. Another thing to do is just make sure that all of the resources are really well known. So if you have an EAP product that you like, if you have other like internal mental health services, to make sure that that's available and really available. And so is your manager comfortable with you going to talk to your wellness coordinator for 30 minutes? Does your manager have the expertise to articulate kind of some of these tough conversations and refer you? Another flexibility would be if it's possible to have work from home schedules, if possible, if necessary, and also places in which you can reduce maybe external stimuli if that becomes triggering for you. So making sure that sound is thought about in the design of an office, or that there's resources brought in to help to mitigate some of that.
Sure. Well, we know that our job seekers, we have a lot of job seekers here at our MOPD Career Center that have mental health conditions, and they don't always disclose their disability at the workplace. Just interested in what advice you have around disclosure for those individuals.
Well, it makes me feel sad that we still live in a place where an internal difference that isn't visible, we want to keep hiding that. But I also understand, because our world is not kind to people all the time, and there is still a lot of stigma. So I would say, like, feel it out. You know, if you're asking questions, for example, when you're looking for a job about like what kind of wellness services do you have, if you think that they respond in a way that is people-centered and healing-centered and thoughtful, they may be a safe place, right, to be able to disclose. I would also say, think about why you're disclosing. Like, what are you hoping will be the outcome of that? Because just telling somebody that you are living with a mental illness, just understand that they may not be able to respond in a way that feels good to you. And the truth is, these are difficult conversations, and our helpline is available 7 days a week for free to have these conversations with individuals and kind of coach them through outcomes, or even like role play some of these conversations if that's helpful.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to ask is, you said, you know, sometimes managers may not have that like type of fluency in order to have those conversations. So what is a way that people can gain fluency in the workplace? Well, maybe the employee and or the manager.
Well, you guys have done an excellent job, because you have for years brought people in to do trainings. You guys have really noticed that this is a function that extends outside of what you guys can do in your workforce program. And so that's one of the ways to make sure that folks have access to training to allow people to maybe think different or relate differently. You don't have to be a therapist. In fact, not all therapists are great managers to be able to engage with people in a way that feels good for them. Another resource would be professionals calling our helpline and doing the same thing. Individual coaching, asking about how they can support people in their workforce. Because really, it's also about expectation setting. We all know it's a healing practice in of itself. So these are my expectations, and we will always accommodate what you need, but we also need to know what you need. How does that look like for you? So it's kind of practicing having some of that dialogue. I do think it's like a very intimate training that you have to do to better understand it, but I think just know that listen with curiosity to people who are working for you, really try to know them in a way that's appropriate, and demonstrate with your own behavior that wellness is an important component to you as well.
All right, well, I think that we are ready to turn this over to our wonderful audience.
Yes, we are. And we would like to invite anybody and everybody to ask questions. And so what we're going to do is Johanna is going to walk around with the microphone, and she'll come around to you. So we're hoping that you're not shy, and you can ask Alexa questions.
Yeah, please just share your first name and your question, or if you don't have to share your name at all, this will be released as part of our podcast.
Hi, my name is Bill. I'm the president of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and I would like to know what we can do to encourage our small businesses in Rogers Park as well as the city of Chicago to encourage them to make it more accessible, make their businesses more accessible. And a lot of our businesses, they feel that it'll be too expensive. It'll be a very big thing when in reality it could be a very easy fix, but they just don't ask. What can I tell to our small businesses?
So glad you're here. What I would say is it's just like person-facing businesses, retail, et cetera, to me is the same thing of making sure that like all lifeguards and babysitters have CPR training. This isn't about making folks clinicians or making sure that they can diagnose. It's helping us individually be comfortable working with or participating in supporting patrons who may make us feel uncomfortable because we don't have enough information. And so I think it starts with training, and it starts with making sure that these small businesses have access to a resource that is available to them for kind of some of the ad hoc questions. We get a lot of calls from small businesses around like de-escalation training, which is so interesting to me because what I hear is there's tension on both sides. And sometimes there's tension when an employee doesn't know how to respond or act with certain individuals, and that individual picks up on that energy. And so then we have some conflict because we're not listening to each other. those trainings are so easy, and we're happy to do them and support you. And everyone at NAMI will be like, you can't just offer free services, but I can, I think. And but we are happy to host like something through the Chamber of Commerce too, just about like, because it clicks once you hear it, you know? And the other way to make it more accessible is just to think about what are your shared agreements in your organizations, in your small businesses. Are we really an open door policy? Or are we not? And if we're not, if you have to buzz in or if you have to do this, like, what is that for us and what does that mean? So some of that is just like team conversations.
Thank you.
Of course. Great. That was a great question. Yeah. Oh, we're gonna get a political doozy. I know.
My name is Lori, and I'm wondering, a lot of the talk we've had is about resources. And I'm wondering if you've had an opportunity to try to get an estimate on what kind of effect the DOGE cuts are going to have on mental illness and the resources we have at the city and county and state, and what that might look like in the next few years.
I think simply put, people will die. I think the funding cuts generally, just the fact that we can sit here forever, and all of us in this space, and say we don't have enough. It's not even about efficiently managed. It's like we don't have enough. And then for somebody to say you have too much, I think that psychologically is damaging as leaders, as people who are working in social service, in public service, and then to the people we serve. Because again, we just talked about why is it so important. What do we have to do first? And we have to first treat people like they matter, and that is not the signal we're getting. And I think we were already stressed as a city and as a county with some of the funding going, the federal COVID recovery funding going away anyways. And so there's been, I wouldn't say chaos, but stress to make sure that we can maintain funding. But maintaining funding is not even enough anyway. This scarcity idea that we feel as individuals is real because it's true. Because we feel like there's choices in how we resource. So the funding is, people will die. If we really do lose Medicaid in the way that they're talking about, we will see total chaos. Our healthcare industry will not be able to keep up with the needs of people. And I think people who may not have like biologically been as predisposed maybe to mental illness, I think that the environmental stressors can definitely, just like we saw in the pandemic, will impact people. And remember, it's not just about healthcare cuts, it's about housing cuts, it's about like SNAP benefits, it's about a lot of benefits that have helped people feel relatively stable. So yeah, we are worried. And you know, usually I'd sit here and I'd be like, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that there's good people fighting this fight, like your amazing commissioner and many other people. But I just feel personally defeated by many of the decisions that have been made. I mean, that was heavy.
It's true.
Yeah.
So,
right?
yeah. It's awful.
It's like, how can we be talked about as though we like none of this stuff mattered, you know?
Yeah, and decisions made by people who have billions of dollars deciding that these programs are frivolous or they're, you know, somehow too costly, even when you see the percentages. And it's really terrible.
And the economics aren't right either. I mean, that's what's also frustrating. It's not cost savings. It behaves as though these decisions behave as though the people who are utilizing some of the resources are not value added back.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about like joy?
Hi, this is Claire. I was wondering what you would tell your younger self as you were starting out in your career and maybe as you were thinking about going into mental health.
Oh my God, so Claire, so many things. What do you mean my younger self, Claire? What are you trying to say? Oh my God, so many things. So I went into mental health because, you know, you learn later in life why, you know, the way I was brought up, et cetera. But I studied psychology in undergrad, and after that I worked in a group home. And some of you know the story, but I learned so quickly, like, the inequality of that system. and how unprepared I was, and how sad that was, that they would just basically put a body in to manage 6 girls who had like such deep trauma history, and thus were pathologized to having serious mental illnesses. So I really wanted to do system work. I think what I would have told myself, and what I still try to tell myself, is slow down with innovation or programmatic solutions until operationally you're sound to do it, which I know seems really boring, but it's true. When I first started at NAMI, we had like 1.5 full-time employees. You know, we have 140 or something, and that's the testament to the organization and the city and the support. But I was so urgent about trying to do more, knowing what NAMI could do, that I feel like I missed some business administrative steps that took a longer time to clean up. So I would say slow down and understand that your urgency can still be effective, balanced with operational efficiency. And don't ignore your family. I did. You know, there were years ago, I was working 60 to 80 hours a week, and it's just too much. And so you think that because you're in a space where you have a lot of impact, that is more important than the impact you have at home. And I regret that decision.
My name is Ashley, and I work at Rush University just down the street, and I just teach a lot of young people. And it almost feels like we're in a mental health epidemic within the age group right now. And a lot of them have this fear, and I think a lot of it has to do with because we're in healthcare, that they can't disclose their own mental health concerns to their employers, and so they kind of hide it, they don't disclose, something comes up, and then it becomes a whole thing. And so for people who feel like, you know, I'm the provider, I have to keep it together, I guess what advice would you have for those students who are afraid, and future providers who are afraid to be open about what they're kind of going through?
Yeah, that's a whole thing within the provider space. You see that a lot with like first responder communities. There's so much stigma, and there's a huge epidemic of physician suicide, nurse suicide. I think that that's a role and responsibility of the institutions and the academic institutions. My sister's a physician, and recently she wanted to like name burnout as a indicator, and she was discouraged to include that for some of the students, because I think culturally it's not as acceptable yet within the provider community. So hopefully that will change. I think that anytime that there's mentorship opportunities and anytime that we can model wellness and the importance of it, it's really important. I think what's also really tricky in the provider space is you are often seen, depending on what type of care you're giving, but you're typically seeing the sickest patients. You're not seeing people who are in recovery. And so there's stigma around that, because what you know and what you start to socialize as being mental illness is really, really sick patients who don't have the resources, because those people aren't necessarily in the hospital. So that also skews some of that, and it creates a lot of, self-stigma too. So yeah, I would say the institution needs to take responsibility. I also think that medical schools need to start, and like physician assistant programs and nursing programs really need to spend a lot more time talking about the wellness of their providers, because if anyone's watching, what is that show with the emergency department?
The Pit.
I mean, do you have so much anxiety? Well, don't. Okay. But do if you're a sponsor or something. But it's like it's real. Like the crisis that people are managing in those healthcare systems you're seeing the worst part of people. You know, you're seeing the worst part of people's worst moment, and you're the responder, and you're like having a bad day too. So. It's not an answer. I'm just validating you.
Yeah, well, and that's a type of job or a type of setting where the system is stressed, where you're stressed,
Right.
You've got these long hours. I mean, it's the norm, I think, is for people to work very long hours in those settings.
They overproduce.
Yeah.
That's part of the ways that people manage their burnout, as they start to become overproducers. You know?
Another occupation, and we talked about it when Alexa was on the podcast before, though, is around like police officers. And again, similar in the way that they're facing very, very stressful situations. They're seeing people often at their worst or in crisis. And so thinking again, like how are folks in that occupation or field supposed to manage this?
When it's also like there's a lot of stigma internally too. There's a lot of, if I disclose this, will I lose access to my job, et cetera, will I be reported? That, I have watched that. I've had the privilege of like watching the first responder community change their own self-stigma, but there's still not a fully resourced investment there.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I am with Thresholds, and so I'm an IPS team lead for our veterans clients as well as for the West Side. And I should also say I'm here first and foremost, though, as a family member. And I just want to start off by saying, before I get into my question, as a spouse, NAMI saved me. NAMI saved me. I was able to get resources through the city of Los Angeles, and I don't know where I would be if it wasn't for NAMI. So thank you. And I'm sharing that message with you, and I had the pleasure and honor of also then being trained to be a facilitator for a family group and to give back and to be of service. With all that being said, and I know you've spoken today about the power of employment, right? It's one of the most powerful interventions when it comes to recovery. And my question is, and I know NAMI had done a study years ago about how the national unemployment rate is still so high, right? It's like 80+%. So my question for you is, if money were no object, okay, what would you do to reduce the national unemployment rate for individuals that have more severe mental health conditions? What would you do? What interventions would you do to go in?
Well, can I just first say thank you for everything you shared. First of all, bravo, and thank you to Thresholds for being that wraparound agency that I was saying. You guys do unbelievable work and have been incredible partners. I'm so glad NAMI showed up for you. But I will say that you showed up for you by voting that you matter in that relationship too. So you were that first step, and you give a lot of people courage by saying that. So thank you. If money was no object, I would resource all of the things that we know are documented barriers. Transportation, housing, childcare, meds and healthcare, and the other accommodations that maybe not as prevalent. I mean, we know that there's employment opportunities, but there's no PACE bus that runs over there, or we see that all the time, and that's a discriminatory practice, right? That those low-income apartments in that community are far away from transportation. And then, of course, also I would make sure that the employers are really well-resourced. I think most organizations should have some level of a chief wellness officer. And we have talked to them a lot. I mean, I think our city should have a chief wellness officer or a commissioner or something in that vein that is really paying attention not just to HR practices, which is more like the paralegal of the organization. I know it's becoming more comprehensive and more wellness driven, but to really make sure that the culture, that the practices, that the communications, that all of those things are aligned with making people feel safe. I said the other day to a colleague, not at NAMI, but another wellness officer, how do you handle when somebody who's in critical need and you're working with them also needs like a corrective action at work? And she said, you give the corrective action. And I was like, really? But what? No, accountability is part of healing, but you should absolutely make sure that your managers are always kind, no matter if someone's in crisis and they're getting this or not. And so those are the things that if we can just really resource and make sure money can afford, 6% of organizations' spend should be dedicated to their employees' wellness. And I don't think that that's typical. Great question. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Trudy Leong, and I'm with the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, the administrator. We have been working with the CTA on numerous issues, especially violence on the trains and intimidation overnight, especially on the Red Line. We noticed that many of the riders there that are causing the trouble, quote unquote, they have mental illness issues. Is there any way that it's getting worse and worse? Is there any way that we could address this, that maybe you could help to address this, because it's very important. If we're able to address that, we will be able to help those riders that are causing the disruption, because a lot of them are homeless, in poverty, and have mental illness. And of course, it will help the riders as well, because people are hesitating to ride the CTA now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
guys are like showing up today from Rogers Park. Thank you. I don't know the direct correlation with that specific community, but I do know a lot of our community social service agencies have lost their homeless outreach funding. And I can imagine that that is not helpful for folks who are struggling and are utilizing public transportation as their housing. And I also understand that people may be uncomfortable with folks who have unpredictable behavior at times. And so there are absolutely models that do not involve first responders that can be really helpful in rapport building. But what I want people to understand is that like homelessness is not a choice. And it takes a really long time to build enough trust with individuals to feel like they can participate in maybe some next steps. And for some people, like the resources that we have here, shelter systems are not a place of safety for them. And so, for example, places like Thresholds, sometimes they're working with people for 8 months, a year, just to build rapport. And it's not expensive, but it's time consuming. And we really need to make sure that those programs are well funded. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people get the help they need so they don't feel unsafe. When people feel unsafe, they can act unsafe. So I think that's the problem that we really need to solve.
Yeah, I have one question. With our Career Center, we have job seekers sometimes who really struggle with mental illness. And, it might be, again, like we're talking about a smaller subset of a population that's really, really struggling, maybe very serious depression. And how can we work with job seekers who are feeling that low or feeling that isolated and disconnected, and at the same time encourage them to continue to look for employment, when we all know that's a very intensive process to apply for jobs, to show up with interviews, to try to show your best self. Like, those two things seem at odds, but we also know that employment is such a big part of mental health. So how would you encourage someone, or how would you work with them in that situation?
Right, because one of the things that happens when we're not feeling good in our mental health is we feel less motivated. And so you're probably seeing a lot of that. I think figuring out how to give folks a win. And it doesn't necessarily have to be directly connected to the employment seeking. It can just be about helping people understand that they are competent and capable. And some of that can be through peer support. Some of that can be through helping them remember times in which they worked through something and it was hard and they got to something that made them feel good and an accomplishment. I think sometimes it's doing something creative even, like building something and reminding people they can build something, whether it's a project together or with a team. And then of course, obviously, really trying to dig deep into what are the barriers here? Like, what is it that's really driving people away from the process? What level of clinical support do you guys have on staff?
Like here, for example, at MOPD, I mean, we rely on our partners quite a bit to provide, clinical support, counseling, that type of thing. Of course, we have referred people to NAMI. At one point, we did have a peer support group here for folks who are seeking employment, just around being able to talk about those stresses and fears. And but on staff, we don't have somebody who is like a case manager, who's a therapist, unfortunately. So we do rely on many great partners like Thresholds and Trilogy and Annixter and NAMI and many others too.
Another thing that you probably already do is when you are working with folks who have gotten to a place of stable employment, what does it look like for them to come back and talk to the crew about their experience? Could be a really nice way to motivate.
Yeah, some success
Great
stories.
idea.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, are there any last burning question or comment?
Thank you. Will, I'm one of the career placement counselors here at MOPD, and I was just wondering, do you have any tips for employees whose employer may not be taking their mental illness seriously or accommodating them the way they could be?
Yeah, call a lawyer.
Well, okay, yeah.
No, I mean, there are, like Access Living and Equip for Equality, like we have some really wonderful resources I think that sometimes we don't even know when we're being discriminated against. And I think employers sometimes don't know. I mean, we get this all the time. My employer said, I can't not work Saturday and Sunday because that's when they're busy, even though I need an accommodation. It's like, that's not, and maybe the employer doesn't know that. And so what we would do in those situations is say, can we help you coach, or can we coach you and help you draft an email that is really outlines, protects you, gets everything down, and really helps you articulate what you need in a friendly way and what the responsibilities are of the organization under the law. That's what I would do. And again, that's another resource that we can provide over the helpline. Yeah, sure. Great. I'm going to be real popular with your call a lawyer,
And also, this isn't like the MOPD employee.
Right, this is an
us.
Alexa
This
James.
is someone else. Yeah.
We hope.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So just putting that out there.
You guys are great hosts.
Oh, thank you.
I think you should do more of this. It feels like people want like a town hall kind of like experience.
It's really, it's really great. I love the audience questions. It's fabulous.
They were really good.
Yeah, really thoughtful and different. Everybody from different backgrounds and experiences. It's really great. And of course, you were like our top guest, our first choice, our only choice.
They called me after 4 other people. So
No, we didn't.
We said we would have you back for part 2.
Yeah, this is part 2, live.
Yes.
Alexa, live.
Yeah, so we know that at the end of the summer, you'll be leaving NAMI.
Yeah.
So just want to hear about what you feel are your greatest accomplishments.
Oh, I saw that question and I was like, oh, I hope they don't ask me that.
Well, that was one. Yeah. Okay. We could pivot.
I think no. I don't. I think that I don't know what my greatest accomplishment was. Maybe making the decision that somebody else should lead. I think it's really important to know when it's important for like another perspective to come in. And I think sometimes people don't because they get so attached and they hold on to it. So I am proud of that hard choice because this is like my greatest privilege, this work.
Yeah, well, would you share like something that you really hold near and dear, that like something that you really learned and will take with you in your next role?
I learned so much from people themselves who have utilized so much bravery to exist in a system of care that is not caring. Resilience, I think, and a good ground. It's really grounding to see like people show up in that way for themselves and for people that they love. I've learned so much about the bureaucracy and the complexity and how like clunky it is, and thus I think will hopefully forever be a better advocate, understanding that it's not just about demanding action, it's about understanding why things are so inactive and then trying to be a part of those solutions. Otherwise you ostracize the other side, Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been like it's been the best learning experience for sure. It's been a total privilege, and I get to hang out with people like you because of it. Like how lucky am I?
Pretty lucky.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful. Yes. We, of course, want to thank you for being our special guest for our live podcast, our first ever live podcast. And we want to thank all of you for participating and being part of this community and audience. And of course, thank you to Commissioner Arfa. And to all of the tech people. There's like a whole crew, which is just incredible. So we appreciate you and thank you very much. And what else?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun planning this. And it was kind of a dream come true for Lauren and I. So we love that you got to be here. And thanks for everyone who came.
Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and a round of applause
for you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this month's episode of All Access. Be sure to check us out on social media at MOPD Chicago.
Special thanks to our executive producer, Commissioner Rachel Arfa, the City of Chicago's production team, our sign language interpreters who helped to make our podcast accessible, and our special guest today.